What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Radical Slice. My name is Eric. Radical Slice is my vehicle for attempting to recreate classic, so far 8-bit game mechanics in Pico-8 and to see sort of how we can model some of those mechanics and what is actually required to make a somewhat playable demo or slice of those classic games. So Kung Fu on the NES, or Kung Fu Master in the arcade, or Spartan X if you were in Japan, I guess, is it's credited with being one of the first, or maybe the first, like side-scrolling beat 'em ups. A much younger me, I never owned this game, but at least a couple of my friends did, and my God, I was just shattered up upon the rocks of this game. It destroyed me. Like I could play Mario and stuff, but I'll be darned if I ever finish the first level of Kung Fu. Now I can just beat it normally, which means old me is just I just own younger me when it comes to games, I guess. And I've never played the arcade one, but the NES one is actually pretty darn fun. It's like a really bite-sized sort of game with a handful of mechanics, so it seemed like a really good option for knocking out a quick slice on Pico 8. Famous last words, real quick. So let's talk about our scope for this one. So we'll have a hero character, and the hero should be able to move around, and they'll have some combat options. So I think the low and high attacks are pretty important, as is having some differentiation between the kicks and punches. In the original game, the kicks and punches had different point values. Here, we're not going to worry about points. We'll figure out what to do about kicks and punches and why one is useful in some cases and one is useful in the other cases. We'll attack that probably towards the end of this project. The player's going to have some health so they don't die after a single hit. And speaking of hits, we'll have some baddies, and we'll have more than one type of baddie. So this will kind of play nicely with the high attack and low attack mechanic. We'll have like tall baddies, we'll have short baddies. Also, we'll try to have more than one level, and since the original has levels that go both from right to left and from left to right, we'll try to do the same thing. Also, some stuff that I think is going to be a stretch for me. So sort of like new challenges that I'm trying to do with this one. I want to try to include a boss character at the end of each level. So bosses are going to have their own health, and they'll have some unique behaviors to differentiate them from the regular enemies. And the other thing that I anticipate is going to be challenging for me is I'm going to do some sound and music this time. So I don't know how much just yet, but probably a sound for when you kick and punch. Maybe when you actually land a hit on a baddie. Probably when the hero dies, and slap together some basic backing music, I guess. So some non-goals for this one. I'm not going to include the jump because like the kung fu jump, it's pretty rough if we're being honest. By the way, I didn't know this until I was writing the intro for this series, but apparently Miyamoto directed the NES port of this game, so that kind of rules, right? That does explain why the game is like super fun. But I guess I'm sorry to young Mr. Miyamoto, but the jump in this game is just not very good. It's just kind of there so you can avoid those stupid snakes, and we're not including snakes. Snakes is a non-goal for this game. And that does free up the up button because you used to jump with the up key. So I have some ideas for what to do with up. Maybe we'll put that at the end of the project. So yeah. Also, no point system. I mentioned that a little bit earlier, but just to make that, just establish that officially, I guess. In terms of levels, I did say we'll do more than one level. Probably that means two. And in the original game, levels 2 and 4 have like level specific enemies, the snakes, and then those darn moths. or whatever those are. We're not going to worry about that. We'll just have a couple levels and we'll have the same enemies, and the enemies will just change. They'll just increase in frequency, right? And also the boss, I have a feeling will probably be the same boss, and we'll just like make it harder for the second level. We'll just tweak some parameters. And finally, let's just all be honest with ourselves, and we're gonna set the expectations low vis-a-vis art, because I am a programmer, and it's not to say programmers can't be good at art, but this programmer is not. So you're gonna get what you get on this, on the visual side of things. I think actually we're gonna probably start with some art. So let's get rolling. Oh, in order to make the character in our game look more humanoid than in the Zelda dungeon slice, we're gonna use like a slightly larger sprite. It'll be about 8 by 16 characters, and I'm going to attempt to draw that with the aesthetic that I want now. So you all can just sit back and watch the hyper speed playthrough of me trying to draw this. Is that too much hair? Maybe like this. Oh yeah, he's got like sweet like sideburns now. All right, this guy's gonna be all right. I wonder if we can give him a beard. Okay, I think for a neutral pose, it's actually pretty good. Let me see if I can give this dude some kind of walk cycle. I don't even know how the heck I'm gonna do this. Hold up. Oh, I love him. I love him so much. He's so good. He is the best. Okay, we need to now have the other foot come forward. So okay. Okay, I've got what I think will work for a walk cycle. I've got 4 guys. I'm gonna try to like cycle between them, and we'll see how this goes. I have a feeling it's gonna be a little bit janky, but we'll try to program it. Just for the record, I'm very pleased with how this guy turned out so far. Very pleased indeed. This far exceeds my expectations of my own capabilities. Okay. Let me try to program this darn thing. I've got the first sprite drawing to the screen, so that's good. I'm going to create a separate file for the player. We'll call it player.lua. And I will set up the frames and the frame timing for this fella's walk animation. walk cycle just kind of running automatically. So I just want to explain briefly how I'm doing that, because it's a little bit different than what I've done before. Let's blow this up so you can take a look. Pretty happy with that. I mean, I might want to change the shape of the feed because it looks a little bit stilted, but as a first pass, I think that's acceptable. Let me explain how I'm working with time now. Now, this is something I picked up from some other folks' videos and explanations. So our main right now is pretty simple. Right now in our init function, I'm just setting our last timestamp to 0. I'm going to explain that later. We need a timestamp to keep track of time. And I'm going to call the reset function on our player object. We don't have to worry too much about what that does right now, but just brings it back to some sort of initial state. And let me actually move update up here because I want to talk about that first. With the update, so this is how I'm dealing with time. There's a Pico-8 function called time that just returns the current time. So I'm calling that and assigning it to now. And then what I do is I compare the current time to the last time I checked the timestamp. So this is going to run every frame. And what it's going to put in DT is the small amount of time that elapsed in between this frame and the previous one, right? So we're going to be on the order of, milliseconds, basically, if we're talking about 30 frames a second or 60 frames a second. Now, the reason I'm keeping track of this is I'm going to pass it into our player, and that's what's going to determine how frequently the frames update. And at the very end, I'm just going to update my last timestamp to be the current value. So we're just repeating this every time, right? Between every frame, we see how much time has elapsed since the last frame. We pass it into the player. And then down in our draw function, which is not that interesting, I'm just drawing this big light blue box across the whole screen, and I'm calling the player's draw method. So let's have a look now at what the player code looks like. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in our player object right now. We'll start with a couple of variables here. Frame wait is the amount of time, and this is clock time, not frame time, but clock time that I want to wait in between updating frames. And this is in seconds. So right now it's 0.2 of a second. Since last frame is how much time has passed since we last updated the player's frame, right? So we're kind of keeping track of, not too dissimilar from what we're doing in our main loop when we see, like, we get the DT, the delta T, between the previous frame and this one. This is similar in the sense of we're just tracking how much time has elapsed since the last time we changed what the player looks like. I have this frames walk table, which is just keeping track of the various animation frames in the walk cycle. If I go back to Pico-8, you'll see what this is related to. So this is using, for our walk cycle, I'm just using these 3 frames, 1, 2, 3. And let me make the box a little bit bigger here. There we go. So this is sprite 2, 3, and 4, and I'm alternating between 2 and 4, and 3 and 4, and 2 and 4, and 3 and 4, like that. So that's what this table is doing here. And I also made one for frames stand, which is just the value 1 right now. I'm not using it, but that's because when he's standing, he doesn't really do anything. He's just kind of hanging out there. So we don't need to have multiple frames. And then I'm storing the frame index, which is the current index, into this table. And so we need to keep track of where we are as we cycle through this. Initially, it'll be the first index, 1. That's why we initialize it to 1. And then after each frame update, we're going to check, we're going to update from 1 to 2 to 3 to 4, and then back in 1 to 2 to 3 to 4. So this guy here, frame index, is what's going to index into our frames walk table. Frames current, I'm planning on using as sort of a pointer to various sets of frames, like frame walk or frame stand, whatever. This is going to just track what our current animation loop is. It's just like a pointer. So when we initialize it, remember back in main, I said we call player.reset. So right now, because I'm just testing stuff, I want to test the walk cycle. So I'm going to set frames current to frame walk. Later on, if I have some other animation cycle, like frames for kicking or punching, then I'm just going to point frames current to p.frames kick or p.frames punch. Now in our update function, we're taking in a couple of arguments. The first one is just the player. That's what is p here. So it's kind of referencing this object up here. It's kind of tricky. You can't really define a function in Lua inside a table like this and reference itself all that easily. So the way you can do that is if I call player colon update, it's actually doing like player update and passing in player as the first argument. It's just a little bit of syntactic sugar. So that's why we refer to P here. So this P is just the player that's just going to modify these values. And the second argument is that dt. Remember the delta t that we passed in here? The difference between the current time and the last frame. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to update since last frame with that dt. And remember, we initialize since last frame to 0. Let me turn off the highlight. We initialize since last frame to 0, and then we're going to add dt here. Then we check, okay, how much time has elapsed now since that last frame was updated? And if it's greater than our frame wait value, that guy, then we update the frame index. So we're going to move to the next animation frame. And since we did that, we know at this instant, this is the last time that we updated the last frame, right? No time has passed since the last frame was updated. So we'll set since last frame to 0. And then here we just have a quick check to make sure that because we're incrementing this frame index value, if it gets larger than the current frame set, that's not good because there's not going to be any data waiting for us. So if it's larger than the length of the current frame set, we'll just set it back to 0. And then in our draw function, turn off the highlights. In our draw function, same thing. Right now I'm passing in the player and the dt. I'm not using dt right now, but I think I might need it, so I passed it in anyway. We're doing a little bit of palette transparency stuff. You can see in here, I'm using that peach color as the background color. And that's because Pico-8 can only really do one transparent color at a time. And I want black to be black. I don't want black to be transparent, right? I want to have black shoes, black sleeves, black belt, I guess. So yeah, I'm using peach as the transparent color, and I'm setting that to be transparent, and I'm setting black, color 0, to be opaque. Now I'm calling the sprite function, and the value that I'm going to pass in is our frames current, which remember up here, we set to be the walk frame set. And, oops, and I'm passing in the frame index. All right, so what this is going to do is just what we said before. Since we're pointing frames current to frames walk, we're going to cycle 2, 4, 3, 4, and then back 2, 4, 3, 4. And I'm just drawing it right in the middle of the screen. And that actually looks pretty decent. Let's watch him go. There he goes. Look at him go. We could speed this up, actually. So let's go back to the terminal. And if we change the frame wait value to be 1, he'll wait less time in between frame updates, so it'll look like he's walking faster. That actually looks pretty good. I might keep that as the value. So yeah, in the previous project, I was using the frame counter as an analog for time, like or a proxy for time. But what happens is if you move between 30 and 60 frames per second, then your animation stuff gets all funky. So in order to avoid that, it's better whenever possible to use actual time differences. The next thing I want to do is get the screen layout sorted. So eventually I want to have a little menu on the top with your health. And I'm not going to do a score on this one, but I assume I'll need a little bit of space for health and stuff. So I'm just going to put a little rectangle up there, and eventually I'll have a background, but I want to, for now, just have a little surface for our guy to walk on. Let me draw those now. Okay, I made the menu thing gray for now. I have a feeling it'll end up being black, but I just wanted to see where the borders of my screen were, just to make recording this and OBS be a little bit easier. All right, now I think I want to work on the movement part. So when I'm moving him left and right, we'll do the walk animation, and when he's not moving, we'll do the standing pose. I've got the left and right walking stuff working. Next, I'm going to try drawing the attack animation, so like the kick and punch bits.
I'm pretty happy with how the combat sprites turned out. So here you can see the punch and the sort of punch anticipation sprite, and then the same for the kick. I am realizing now though that I sort of aligned these poorly on the sprite sheet. And so what I'm going to do is kind of split these into the main body part. If I shrink it down, it'll probably make more sense. You can sort of see here the punch sprite on the far left here is sort of like cut off part way. So what I think I'm going to do is sort of I'll just undo this in a sec, but kind of cut the fist off into its own sprite. And similarly for the leg, I'll kind of cut this into its own sprite so that it makes it easier to draw when the time comes. I have a feeling that the main player character bit and the fist bit are going to be drawn separately, and I probably want to handle them separately for collision purposes too. So let me just clean up the alignment on the sprite sheet. All right, that's a little bit better. Now I have these weirdly disembodied, like let me show you, hands and feet and stuff now, which we will reattach when we draw the sprites. I realize now that like I don't have the crouching stuff done, and I definitely want to have crouching attacks. But first I want to get the standing attacks looking and feeling good, and then I'll do the crouching stuff later, maybe even after I do the enemies. I haven't decided yet. So let me go ahead and figure out how I can make these attacks look good. In particular, what I'm thinking about right now is, you can see for each of the states I sort of have the antic state where he's getting ready to kick, sort of like this half leg, and then the full kick where he's like his mouth is open and he's like "Kabah!" And so I'm probably going to need to do some state machine-y type stuff to make that work correctly with the timings. Let me give that some thought, and I'll probably end up drawing some diagrams for it.
Hey, okay, I think we can wrap up there, and we'll save the first state machine of this series for next time. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate you giving your time to these videos. If you enjoyed this, you can click like. If you really enjoyed it and you want to see more, you can maybe click subscribe, but no pressure. I hope that some of this was informative or at least entertaining, and I hope that if you are doing your own projects, that your development efforts are forever fruitful. And I will catch you next time for some state machines. Bye for now.